Hi, welcome to Dr. Lisa Sulsenti podcast. I am Dr. Lisa, and I'm so excited that we are into our 5th season for this podcast. I'm just super excited. And I want to continue the theme of sharing some really great patient stories with you guys so you can understand functional medicine a little better than where you're at. But it's really cool. So I did tell you guys in the last podcast that I was going to talk about a child today, and I have some really good cases. This one's a big case, so I'm hoping I can get 2 in, but this one's a really big case, so I don't know. I have been working with kids for a really long time, and the reason is I got where I am today in functional medicine because of my son, Luke, who I guess when he hit the preschool age, he couldn't really do it. So I was always getting calls, like I would drop him off and just say school started at 9 a.m. By 10:15, they were calling me to come get him. And he was in the corner, rocking and hitting himself and just done. And I'd get him in the car and he would sleep on the ride home and he would just sleep. And so that actually continued well into elementary school, where maybe by 12 o'clock they'd be calling me and he would just either have flipped his desk over, or they brought him in the principal's room and he would just rip it apart, or he, constantly rocking in the corner and just, doing the stimming and stuff like that, and just couldn't get through a day of school. Overwhelming, tons of sensory issues. And at the time, there was really no autism, and there was no autism spectrum disorders. It was really Asperger's versus, autism, and they were really separate, complete, distinct, different things. But he eventually got diagnosed with both. And then so when autism spectrum disorders came around, I guess then he got put on the spectrum. And I don't want to get into the whole thing because it's a great story, and I do have the book you could read that I wrote about to help you navigate school and how we got him through school. And it goes all the way to college. I had kept adding to it, and yeah, so we actually did really well, but it wasn't easy. It was hellacious. It was actually one of the hardest ever things I've ever done. But so what happened was they were like, oh, you shouldn't have red dye, or you shouldn't have wheat, or you shouldn't have this, or you shouldn't have that. And I couldn't understand, I had my nutrition and dietetics degree. I had my chiropractic degree. I had a background in neurology. I really fully understood the body, more so than I ever possibly would in my life. I've dissected a cadaver for 9 months. I get the body, but I was just kind of like, what? How does wheat get to the brain? It doesn't, so how is wheat affecting behavior? So this is where I got into leaky gut, and I'm in New Jersey, and there was just these little tiny meetings of some MDs, right? Some chiropractor, some nurses, and we would just get together and try to learn this. And so there was a couple gurus who were getting it down. They were older than us, sharing what they were learning and knowing. There was no really labs at the time. It was just kind of figuring out a lot of things that were going on with the systems of the body, particularly the liver and the gut. And then years and years later, when I was bringing in a leaky gut diet, things I was doing with Luke to my practice, and people were getting better that weren't kids, I was getting thyroid better. I was getting polycystic ovary syndrome better. And I was like, whoa, there's something here. So I just really started diving heavy into leaky gut seminars. And then the lab testing came along, I would say 6-7 years ago, and just exploded into what you can learn and find. So I've done a lot of children, okay? And when I see this, I see things over and over again. I use products, or I do a system, or I try a step, or I do a protocol, or if I make it better, you just get good at it. You just see things. So this patient came to me, and she's about 2.5 years old, 3 years old. And she came to me, and I've had this several times, but this case was the most severe that I've seen. And what her symptoms were, actually the mom brought her to me crying, and she just couldn't figure out. And when I looked at the history of all the things the mom had tried, the mom was really on the right path. She really was doing really well. I don't think she vaccinated her kids. I think she gave, I'm pretty sure, she didn't vaccinate her kids. I'm saying I don't think because I'm being soft here on the podcast, but I think I'm going to go for it. She did not vaccinate her kids. They ate organic, super healthy, made her own baby food. She was totally one of those moms that just was on it. And so when she started seeing some of these symptoms, she was trying different things. Like she thought, oh, maybe she has a parasite, or maybe she has this, or, maybe she has that. So she was trying some of the things that she would see or research herself. The problem was she just didn't have a system to follow, and really was just missing a few things that I could put together for her and say, do it in this manner, try it this way. And the part that was missing was more of the gut health. And that's where I came in and put it together for her. So it's a beautiful thing. Her symptoms really were, and this was really sad, that the baby had skin eruptions all over her body from head to toe. And you can say eczema, but you could say hives, but some of it was weeping. Some of it literally had stuff coming out. So she had a little bit of everything. So when you're looking at her, you can't just say psoriasis, eczema. You can't just say hives. It was just a weepy thing, and itchy, itchy, itchy. Just the baby was itching. And so it's like when you see those babies that have they'll say, oh, it's cradle cap. Okay, maybe even a little bit of cradle cap. This was weeping stuff from head to toe. And you've seen babies like this. I've seen babies like this. And so, of course, people say I read the comments in social media, and you'll see something like, oh, it's the vaccines. They're not detoxifying them. Could be, but this baby wasn't. It can. I've worked with kids where you have to really slow down on the vaccines and get the liver and the gut to get rid of the heavy metals. Just talked about a podcast where I had a 50-something-year-old woman have aluminum and lead high in her because her gut didn't detoxify. So you can go to the podcast before this one. We just talked about a grown woman who couldn't get rid of heavy metals. So yeah, it can happen with babies. It's a thing. It's nothing to fight about. It's true. In this case, I didn't think heavy metals with her, but could be, right? If she tried medications and stuff, there's heavy metals in medications. And you know what? There's heavy metals in food. There's heavy metals in soil. It's in air. It's in water. So yeah, you know what? Thinking maybe she's not detoxifying that. Yeah. And so we're going through here. And as I'm going through the history, the mom said mold to me. And she said, I think there's mold here. I think it could, that's what her gut feeling was. And parasites were her two things. And she was trying to figure them out. And I said, well, here's the thing. If you have something in the gut, like a parasite or an E. coli, I've seen I call it K pneumonia because it's a big word. I've seen C. diff. I've seen all these different bacterias. If your child has something going on and growing in the gut, even yeast is a big thing with kids that are on the spectrum. If you have something overgrowing in the gut, it won't allow the gut to detoxify. So then you are going to see things like mold and things like heavy metals. So it's like you build. So you have to reverse engineer it. So yeah, if your child has been exposed to mold, this is what she's told me in her history, she might not be eliminating the mold, and the mold is growing within her and really getting her sick. However, you're never going to get rid of the mold, which is the mom was trying to do on her own, because the gut needs to be cleared first. The gut needs to be repaired first. Do you get what I'm saying? So this is where functional medicine is phenomenal. It really is, because it understands this. So if there's a presence of mold, it's going to impact the gut's ability to detoxify. So right? So no matter what age you are, you might you might be building toxins. We looked at her CBC and her metabolic panels, and it reflect this burden. She had a lot of systemic stresses. She had inflammation. Just in the regular blood panel that you would go, I do too, but the MDs do, your regular insurance panels. We saw inflammatory markers. I also decided I was going to test her for MTHFR, because in my mind, I was like, all right, she has a sibling. She had two siblings. And I was like, okay, they are fine. They're okay in the home where the mold is. They're also okay, I've seen this with many families where there's one child that's not okay and the other two are okay, and they're all being vaccinated, but the one child's not doing well. They have high metals. So why? You want to think, well, it could be genetic, right? So the MTHFR is a genetic mutation that actually can reduce your ability to methylate, to conjugate, to detoxify and eliminate these things that you have to be. Number one thing that the liver is supposed to do, and if you keep listening to me, by the end of this year, you're going to go, convert. Yes, the answer is convert. It's going to take something that you have too much of or you just don't need, and it needs to convert it to something water soluble that's really safe for you to pee and poop out and sweat out. And it's going to send it over to the gut. And so the liver has to do its job, and then the gut has to get rid of it. But if you got some nasty stuff in the gut and you have a leaky gut, the gut might actually send it back into the body and recirculate it back into the bloodstream. And this is how we don't eliminate heavy metals. This is how we don't eliminate mold. We don't eliminate estrogen. We don't eliminate cholesterol. Keep going. Toxins, things, substances. So this is what we did with her. We were like, all right, to the mom. I said, you're on the right path. You're such a good mom. But what we need to do is get into her gut. When we got into the gut, we definitely saw parasites. So the mom was right because she saw something in the diaper. She kind of knew. So I was like, all right. But the problem here is usually I go to the gut first and I make sure I eliminate, like I have a patient right now who has E. coli. So I said, we need to get rid of the E. coli first. Then your high heavy metals and your high molds we can attack. But we've got to get the E. coli out of the gut. Then we got to rebuild your gut microbiome. We've got to make sure that the dysbiosis and the imbalance going on in there is fixed. So I'm going to just talk this through to you guys. What you want to do first is you want to make sure that the gut's working properly. So yes, with this child, we ran a food sensitivity test, just like the other patient in the podcast before this, the 50-something-year-old woman. And this is a 2.5-year-old child. So, right? So the same thing. What foods is the immune system in her gut attacking? And we need to take them out right now. It's not forever, but we need to get them out so there's no inflammation, there's no histamine. She's in a histamine problem, which is what we see in the weepy skin. The other problem she was having was she was reacting to all these different types of food. So the mom felt like no matter what she had, she was having allergic reactions. That's mast cell. Once you get too much histamine, you get it histamine intolerance and you roll into a mast cell problem. So we were all the way down, and I've seen this with patients where it gets so bad that they start reacting to everything. So now they might just, clear up, but then keep reacting to foods. And I had it with my son. He had a mold problem, and then all of a sudden allergic to the dog, and then all of a sudden allergic to wheat. And it just rolls because it turns into too much histamine being released by the body, and then the mast cells are over-responding and the immune system starts overreacting. So let's reel it in. Where do we start with this noise? High mold, high heavy metals, parasites, histamine, mast cells. What do? You got to just go start slow and run the food sensitivity panel and run that non-celiac gluten disorder panel because the medical world ignores it. So, okay, make sure they don't have celiac. If they're 2, you have to run that. You could check it off if that comes back. Then you want to run the non-celiac gluten dis panel and see if the immune system in the gut is attacking the wheat and the gluten proteins. If they are, it comes out. You'll also want to look at, there's an autoimmune panel in our testing to see if you have an autoimmune reaction to wheat and gluten, because that is really important. That could be asthma, that could be neurological problems, and that could be skin problems. So you have to, connect that for the mom if that's there. And then you can step away from that panel and go, all right, let's run 180 foods. Maybe a kid only needs 94 foods, but you're going to run a food panel, food sensitivity panel, and you're going to be like, all right, what foods are coming out really, really high, and do we have to remove so we don't have this inflammatory response, this histamine response, this cytokine response, and this leaky gut problem. So the food is really a big part of getting better and getting the gut to work. That's the whole goal, right? Get the gut and the liver to convert, eliminate. Okay, So the next part is to look at the stool test, like we did with the 50-something-year-old woman. We're going to look at the stool test. We're going to look at the gut microbiome, which is all the good bacteria, the commensal communicative bacteria she was born with, her mom, got from her mom. And it is what it is. But the thing is, you're looking for those overgrowths. And I talked about in the last podcast, if you're looking at a garden and you've got tomatoes and you've got zucchinis and you've got cucumbers growing and peppers, you want to make sure that they're all growing evenly, right? And robustly. You don't want just a few. You don't want just 4 tomatoes. You want a lot of tomatoes. So you want your microbiome to be robust. It's growing plentiful, bountiful. But you also want to make sure there's not one family overgrowing another. You don't want the tomatoes growing out of control and choking the peppers. So that would be a gut dysbiosis or an imbalance. And we look for that in the stool test. And she did have that, so we have to get her the right probiotic. That's what my lab does, the company I work with. They match it. They say, hey, make sure that she has the right probiotic. This is where the mom was right, trying a probiotic, but she had the wrong one, because you can't figure out the right one without the stool test. So it's something some of these things she just couldn't do, but I could string it together for her. So I'm like, all right, these are the foods she has to take out. And then here's the right probiotic you have to put in. Okay. Then we had to see, is there any like nasty critters in the garden here? Does she got some pests out of control? If you know pests in the garden could be fine, right? But the body has to be able to fight them off, deal with them, right? But if the pests get out of control, they'll start eating the plants and destroying the garden. So that's what we have to look in the microbiome. Are there things out of control in here that are going to ruin the gut's ability to do its job? So we looked, and she definitely had a lot of parasites. Mom kind of knew that, right? Because she saw it in the diaper. So this is what we're saying. Mom is so on it, but what do? Now, what you typically want to do is you want to get rid of that first. Get rid of the parasites first, and then jump in and rebuild the gut microbiome. Take the food out, and then fix the gut wall, because the gut wall's damaged. So then I get in there with some bone broth. I get in there with some aloe. We get in there and we just really try to heal the gut wall. We want to get that gut to what? Convert and eliminate properly, absorb the good stuff, eliminate the bad stuff, right? That's what functional medicine's all about. However, in this particular case, and that's usually what I do with a lot of people, but I don't do the same thing with everybody. This is why I'm unique. People will say to me, well, what do I need you for? Or somebody said something that to me one day, was like, I can figure this out by myself. And I was just like, okay, why I'm so great for you is because I don't do the same thing with everybody. In this particular case, she was suffering so bad from the mold. The mom, and by this time, they had found it in the wall in her bedroom. And her bedroom wall went up against, and think about where your bathrooms are and your kitchens are, in the wall. And this is in my son's. This happened when we moved in. There was water in my son's closet, because his closet backed up to my shower in my bedroom. And we had just moved in, and I guess there was a pipe that wasn't tightened enough, so it was leaking. But leaking enough where we could see it. They ripped up they did all the remediated that they had to do. But if you have a pipe that's leaking very little and you don't know it in the wall, wherever there's water, there's mold, right? So you could have a small leak or drip in a wall, and mold is growing in there. And if your bed is up against it, or your office, your desk, you could be exposed to mold. So again, if your body can eliminate what you're breathing in, you're fine. But if your body can't, you're not good. So they had found it, and what we had to do with this child before I could get anywhere, because she was so bad, was we had to get her out of the mold scenario. So with mold, particularly if it's in the room, and I just had a patient where they found it in the girl's bedroom. She's 20. They found it in the bedroom, in between albums, records. And they brought up some vintage records from the basement to listen to, and no one saw the mold, but I think the mom thought it through and she was just like, she smelt it. And when I said, I'm going to test for mold, just because they had a history of it. And again, when you have someone who's super, super sick and you can't figure it out, you got to go for these toxins, because usually I've done it enough now where someone sits in front of me, I'm like, I think you're toxic. I just think it's a toxic thing. So I went to test for the mold on the 20-year-old, and then the mom's like, I'm going to go look for it. So this is how this goes. And she found it. Both moms found it in bedrooms. I actually had another patient where it was in her office. Her office was a room like above a garage, and it was half finished. And she was the only one sick in the house, but she worked in there every day. So sometimes it's just there. You just don't see it, right? I said, look, I had the water leak in my house. So in this scenario, when it's with mold, I have to fix the gut because I got to get the gut to clear the mold, but I got to get the patient away from the mold. So you see the problem? So you got to get the mold to be like the source of the mold out. So there's no way, it's not negotiable. You've got to remove yourself from the mold. And then we're going to make a decision together if we're going to try to eliminate the mold or we're going to try to eliminate the parasites first or whatever. Sometimes most people have something going on in the gut with mold because the mold is the driving force sometimes for mast cell, for really serious things. So those are some things you have to talk about with the patient. We have to see the scenario and how bad it is. In this case, with this patient here, we had to focus on the mold first. And as soon as we removed her and we gave her some supports to help the system, it's a baby, they heal really fast. Her whole entire skin cleared up. She had some couple moments where she was reacting to some foods. But then she had arsenic, high arsenic. She had high barium. She had some thallium. Thallium is actually very common with kids on the spectrum. So she had high heavy metal. She had high molds. And so the first phase of her treatment was really to address the mold, get her out. The second phase of the treatment was to take out the food sensitivities and try to work on the gut health, get the gut to help working. And the third phase is going to be to actually go in and mop everything out and then also help with the MTHFR. It's a multifactorial thing. It's not easy. You know, and you have to take these things slow and steady, and sometimes we go too fast, you know, and sometimes we can't do it. We just can't. Like, how do you know you have mold if you don't do a mold test, right? How do you know which probiotic is if you don't use this specific stool test? So there are things that really you guys are trying and you're doing really well, but there's just some things missing. In this particular case, when the medical world ran her stuff, she had elevated glucose. She had elevated liver enzymes at 2 years old, right? So these things are sometimes that you start seeing. Inflammatory markers were high in a baby. Her red blood cell, her platelet counts, those things were kind of all off too. So this is like pretty serious. So we had MTHFR, we had mold, we had parasites, we had heavy metals. And so, and then when you get down to the micronutrient testing, which I did with both of these patients, they definitely had deficiencies, but I tend to put those on like the fourth step is to focus on those, although you need them for detoxification. So it's one of those weird things, but you know, you got to get the gut to work better. You got to get the gut working and clear to get to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. This is what functional medicine is all about. I wanted to give you guys a picture. I might share one more case on the next one, or maybe I'll wait and I'll throw it in there. You know, I'm talking out loud right now. So I think what I want to do is I want to be able to give you some takeaways in the next podcast. But I will add more of these cases in this year so you guys can understand the power of functional medicine, how it's life-changing. We do this with it doesn't have to be rashes head to toe. You know, I've done so many cases with kids that can't focus, kids that can't, you know, keep getting bad notes from the teachers, kids that just can't, they have the ADD or the HD or the Asperger's, whatever diagnosis they're giving you. And, you know, you just really want to help their gut and their brain balance together. You want to start connecting the brain and the gut, and you want to really the gut health is the brain health. So we do a lot of that. I've been doing a lot of infertility. We just had 4 or 5 babies born last year that the year before they came to me to get healthy or fix things that were going on, hormone problems, and then got pregnant the following year. And now we have these babies. So this is really fun. It's just so much fun. Heart cases are hard, yeah, but functional, you can see, really, really dives in deeply. So keep listening to the podcast. I'm going to definitely share some more. And yeah, thanks for listening. I thank you.